Chairman, and Mr. Ross, welcome. Appreciate your willingness to serve and your previous service to our country. And you know, you and I talked about it in our meeting before this hearing, but I had an opportunity to have a front row seat in some ways, working at the National Security Council staff at the White House on economic issues, what happened with the steel industry and what you were able to do. And I think that's something that is an important and positive part of your record. And I know that there's thousands and thousands of steel workers who appreciated that. We also had the opportunity to talk about, to me, one of the most important issues that we can face as a nation right now, and that's the issue of economic growth. And as you know, the last 10 years, we've had a lost decade of economic growth. President Obama is going to be the first president never to hit 3% GDP growth ever in a year, almost never hit it in a quarter. And so that's, the Obama administration has now said, well, that's the new normal. We shouldn't expect to hit traditional levels of American growth, 3.5%, 4%, 4.5%. Do you agree with that the new normal is something that we're achieving our full maximum potential as an American economy at, 1.5%, 2% growth, the numbers of the last 10 years? Or can we get back to traditional levels of American growth? And if so, how do we do that?
I think we can. During the campaign, I characterized the 1.5%, 2% not as the new normal, but as the new dismal. I don't think we need to have the new dismal.
So you think the narrative that's very pervasive in Washington, D.C., that the new normal is here to stay, this is what we should achieve, this is what we should expect, I think it's a surrender. So you disagree with that?
I'm pretty sure that if that proves true, you won't be seeing me much longer because the president-elect won't put up with it.
So how do we get to traditional levels of American growth, 3.5%, 4%, 4.5%, which, by the way, Democrat and Republican administrations have achieved this. This has been that's the normal for America.
Well, I think I wrote an editorial with Peter Navarro that outlined 4 planks to the economic policy. One was regulatory reform. I'm not against all regulations, obviously, but I do think that pendulum perhaps has swung a bit further than it should. And I believe the president will roll back some of the regulations. I don't know which ones, but I think he'll roll back some. And that's one of the most frequent complaints I hear from the business community is about over-regulation. A second is the energy policy, both making us closer to being energy self-sufficient, because we still are a net importer of energy, and however you look at it, that's a drain on the economy. Third is what we've been talking about before, helping our balance of trade, particularly by increasing the exports. I think if we combine each of those and just get a fraction of a % more growth from each, we'll get to the kinds of numbers that you were talking about. And last, of course, being the infrastructure. We desperately need infrastructure, not only because of the direct jobs it creates, but inefficient and archaic infrastructure is itself a drain on the economy. The grid, all kinds of things have to be fixed if we're going to be a truly competitive economy.
Thank you, and we want to work with you on those 4 elements of getting back to the traditional levels of American growth. I want to talk next, and I appreciate you highlighting the issue of fisheries and their importance to coastal communities. In my state of Alaska, employment in the fishing industry is actually bigger than even in the oil and gas industry. So healthy coastal communities, a well-managed, sustainable fishery. Our fishery is considered probably the most well-managed, sustainable fishery on the planet. Is very important. I have the honor of chairing the subcommittee on oceans and fisheries in the Coast Guard on this committee. So I just want to get your commitment that, as you know, a big part of the Commerce Department is NOAA, is fisheries, is focusing on that data to keep our fisheries well managed. I just want to get your commitment to working with this committee, working with me, working with the subcommittee on those important issues for the country, for my state, and also on some of the personnel decisions that you'll be making, that the administration will be making, on having the best people who understand fisheries, understand Alaska. You know, I like to say we're the superpower of seafood. Almost 60% of all seafood harvested in the United States comes from Alaska's waters. So, if confirmed, I'd like to get your commitment to working closely with us on those important issues.
Well, you certainly have it, and I am very mindful of the discussion we had about king crabs coming in from Russia as part of our trade problem, and I assure you that too will be something I'll look into if confirmed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ross, and I know you heard that a number of us are moving between committees for other confirmation hearings, so if I ask a question that you've already answered, please bear with me. But I very much appreciated your focus and in earlier rounds of questions on economic growth, where you're talking about energy. As you know, in Alaska, we have a lot of it, and we need to produce more of it, and we're very much looking forward to having a executive branch that wants to help us, not stop us from producing energy like we have with the Obama administration, rolling back some of the unnecessary regulations, infrastructure, and then trade. And I think on the issue of trade, I know you've answered a couple questions on it, but as you and I discussed, I believe the Trump administration is going to be the first administration in U.S. history to come into office with trade promotion authority. And a number of us supported that, in part because President Obama got 2 years of it, but we were hoping the next president would be a Republican and would have 4 years of it. That's happened. The administration doesn't have to spend 1 ounce of political capital on getting TPA, and that's usually hard to get over the goal line. So can you just talk a little bit about your views on bilateral trade priorities, but also there have been reports in the press about some kind of 35% tariff. That would seem to me to be about as anti-growth as possible. I know you mentioned in some of your answers Smoot-Hawley, but how are you going to look at the trade element and really take advantage of what's an enormous opportunity, which is TPA that you can use? That's a very, very powerful tool to help American exports.
Well, TPA is an important tool because what it gives is relative assurance to the party with whom you're negotiating that you can deliver. Because any negotiation is handicapped if you're not sure the other guy can deliver on what has been negotiated. So it's a big help in that regard. And there are, as you know, some consultative steps that are required vis-a-vis between the President and the Congress on TPA. And I'm quite sure that if he uses it, the President-elect will adhere to those requirements. So those are good and useful components of the trade process. And in terms of the 35% and some of the other statements, I think the President has done a wonderful job preconditioning the other countries with whom we'll be negotiating that change is coming. The peso didn't go down 35% on accident. Even the Canadian dollar has gotten somewhat weaker, also not an accident. So I think he has done some of the work already that we need to do in order to get better trade deals. Because when you start out with the adverse party understanding that he or she is going to have to make concessions, that's a pretty good background for any negotiation to begin. So I'm very grateful that he's made this task a little bit easier by alerting everybody that change is coming.
But would 35% tariffs be pro-growth or not?
Oh, I think that the pro-growth thing is stimulating exports much more than just curtailing imports. But tariffs can be, countervailing duties and punishment to people for dumping is essential, because there are inappropriate and illegal trade practices being performed. And if you don't really punish them, you're never going to modify their behaviors. So there's certainly a role for it there.
Let me ask just a related question when you're talking about trade tools, and that's, I know there's been a lot of focus on China. That's in the area of reciprocity. So right now, as you know, there's stories, and it's happening. China has two very large investment funds where they're buying up strategic companies in Western Europe, trying to in the United States. Some are strategic, some are just important. You know, they're looking certainly at the movie industry in Hollywood and chip manufacturers. And yet, I think it's pretty common knowledge that if our companies wanted to go to China and buy up a big movie industry or buy up a big chip manufacturer or buy up a tool and die industry that's very, or a company that's very strategic, the answer would certainly be no.
Right.
So in the WTO, their accession, as far as I know, did not have a reciprocity requirement with regard to investment. However, do you think it would be in the interest of the United States, and it's a debatable topic here, a number of us are looking at legislation to maybe include investment reciprocity as part of the CFIUS process. Do you think that would be wise, or do you think that would undermine the vitality of the United States by restricting investment, even though there's clearly no reciprocity going on right now between the number one and number two economies in the world? And in my view, it's an unlevel playing field. China can do it. They're doing it. If we want to go over and do it, we couldn't.
Well,
how do we deal with that?
I think reciprocity is an important concept in trade agreements, and I think there are other important concepts as well. To me, another one is simultaneity of concessions. We have tended in prior trade agreements to make our concessions up front, and the other party makes their concessions later. But the problem is that later sometimes doesn't come, because when you have weak enforcement provisions and you've already made your concessions, a little bit hard to unscramble the eggs. So I think reciprocity is an important concept going forward. I think simultaneity is an important concept going forward. I think, as I've mentioned, I think while you were out of the hearing room, the concept of an automatic reexamination after a period of time to find out, well, what worked, what didn't work, and what should we fix. I think there are a number of these conceptual issues that have not been present in prior trade agreements, but I would hope that if confirmed, I can contribute toward designing kind of a model trade agreement where we would introduce into it certain principles that would have to be in any agreement. I think it's a huge mistake to start out each time with kind of a blank page from ground zero. Makes it take longer, makes it harder to negotiate. The best negotiating tool is to be able to tell someone, I can't change this. This is official policy. You know it is. We got it in 10 other deals. We're not going to give you anything different. That's a much better position, in my opinion, than starting out with a blank slate.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, may I have opportunity to answer one, or ask one more question? Thank you. Mr. Ross, I wanted to talk just a little bit on the infrastructure element. I think you're going to see a number of Senate colleagues on both sides of the aisle be supportive of doing more with regard to infrastructure. And as we talked about, one element that I think a number of us see as critical when we move forward on a big, large-scale infrastructure initiative is fixing the federal government's broken permitting system.
Yes.
So whether that's, on average right now, it takes 6 years to permit a bridge in the United States of America. We had a hearing here on airport infrastructure last year. It took the Seattle airport to build a new runway 15 years to get the federal permits. In Alaska, it took Shell 7 years to get the federal government's permission to drill one exploration well in 100 feet of water. It's a broken system. And if we have an infrastructure package that's in the hundreds of billions without a dramatic overhaul of our permitting system, I fear it's going to be money that can't be deployed. Would you agree to work with us on not only focused on the financing of infrastructure, but the very, very important issue of fixing a broken federal permitting system where, you know, this country used to build big things on time, and now we can't permit a bridge inside of half a decade?
Oh, I know. The permitting is an issue. I think it's one of the reasons why there weren't so many shovel-ready projects when President Obama got money for infrastructure. And the permitting isn't just on big projects. In some parts of this country, if you want to put a porta potty on a well site, you have to go get a permit, and it takes weeks to do that. That's not even drilling a hole in the ground. It's not invasive. It's not anything. I think we've gone a little permit nutsy.
Well, I look forward to working with you on that, and I look forward to your speedy confirmation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.